Hello and welcome to session 8. Today we're going to take a hardcore verbal drill. It's been a while since we took a verbal drill. The last time, in fact, that we did a verbal drill in class, we only looked at two problem types, text completions and sentence equivalents. Today, we're going to throw in reading comprehension as well. Are you ready? Let's go. All right, so this first one's serving basically as a warm-up to be sure that you're practicing good strategy, looking at targets, clues, pivots, coming up with a good fill-in for yourself. Here, what exactly is our target? As a boss, she encouraged self-respect among her subordinates and would brook no blank or insincere flatterers. So our target is something that she would not brook. Obviously, it's helpful if we know what brook means, sort of to tolerate in this regard. But we do know that we have a pair of things at the end anyway. So if she's not going to brook the blank or insincere flatterers, this is a ripe time to recycle. And we could simply put flatterers in the blank. Again, as a sentence in literature, it doesn't make sense. Would brook no flatterers or insincere flatterers. However, we know that the meaning is correct, and that's the point. You could also put any word related to flatterers that you could come up with, such as kiss-ups, or you could recycle the adjective insincere. Would brook no insincerity or insincere flatterers. You might even say insincere people or something like that in the blank. And then, of course, when you get to the choices, who knew there were this many words to describe different types of people? As it happens in this example, the two that we want that most nearly mean a flatterer are myrmidon and toady. I always remember Toady because of the band, the Toadies. Myrmidon is just one that I have to remember. It's sort of related to mermaid in my mind, but the meaning, of course, is nowhere close to that. If you come up with a snazzy way to remember Myrmidon, please let me know. Notice that there are a couple of other pairs here, or another pair here, I should say. Pettifoggers and shysters are both sort of bad lawyers in their specific meaning. Simpleton is a fake, and confabulator is someone who tells stories, perhaps lies, perhaps imaginative stories, or perhaps is just someone who engages in conversation. Okay, let's keep moving. How about a minute for this one? All right, and I put the timer going up there just to mix things up here. I think in this sentence, it's really important to look at our pivots. In some cultures, braggadocio is never acceptable, whereas in others. So braggadocio is never acceptable in some, and in others, we can infer that it must be acceptable. So acceptable and appropriate here, of course, synonyms. So this is another great opportunity to simply recycle. Especially helpful if we know that braggadocio is where the word to brag comes from. So in some cultures, bragging is never acceptable, where in others, it is sometimes appropriate to vocally boast or brag about one's accomplishments. And then we get to the choices, looking for the two words that most nearly mean to brag or to boast. And those two words are vaunt and tout. Notice there is a bit of cognitive dissonance, I imagine, here when looking at tout and flout. They are kind of similar, but they're much more similar in appearance than they are in meaning. Tout is sort of to brag about one's accomplishments, whereas flout is something like you do to the rules as an unruly child or something in school. It's sort of to disregard. To elicit is to get information. To intimate is to hint. Now, this might look like the word intimate when you first see it. The verb intimate is to sort of hint about something, another way of giving information. Fetter is related to fetters and chains, to restrict. All right, let's keep moving. This little sentence is chock full of clues. So you can basically take your pick of recycling words here. Subsistence farmers barely able to eke out. Now, what kind of living are subsistence farmers barely going to eke out? Well, you could say a subsistence living. You could say a bare living, or any other synonym there. They're not living in abundance. In other words, so you could say meager. You could say small. Anything that relates to the idea that this is a very minimal, very sort of just barely living kind of living. When we get to the answer choices, mimetic means to mimic, just like the root of the word mime. Marginal, that's what we want there. Minatory, I always think of the word minotaur when I think of minatory, like the old bull in the labyrinth is very threatening, and that's the meaning of the word minatory. Scant, that's another synonym for what we're after here. Syncretic means to sort of put beliefs together. It's almost like a synthesis or synergy in terms of specifically relating to philosophies or religious beliefs. Crepuscular is an interesting word. Not only is it just, I think, interesting, there aren't many words pronounced in this fashion, crepuscular. And despite the fact that it may sound like pustule or pus or something nasty, it has kind of a cool meaning. Crepuscular relates to just the hours between night and day. So crepuscular animals come out at twilight, at dawn in the morning, and at dusk in the evening. So an interesting word there. And it also gives I shouldn't say it gives birth to, that's what I was about to say, but there are two other related words to crepuscular, one of which I think is really beautiful and the other not so much. So crepuscular refers to activity that happens at dawn and dusk. Vespertine is a great word that just means taking place at dusk. Unfortunately, the word that means just taking place at dawn is not near as beautiful in my opinion. It's called matutinal, Matutinal. But vespertine, I think, is a great word. Okay, moving on. Let's mix things up here, and we're going to do some reading comprehension. Notice this is a reading comprehension argument, so be sure you're practicing good strategy here. Don't look at the answer choices. Identify the question type. Based on the question type, if you need to find the conclusion, find the conclusion, consider gaps in the logic, and then move on to the choices. I'll give you about 2 minutes to work this one out. All right, that was a generous allotment of time. If you finished it ahead of time, that's awesome. If you're still trying to finish it, or if you finished it right at the buzzer, that would be acceptable for the test, but you want to always push yourself to be able to go faster on these. And if you just can't, if it's just going to take you 1 minute and 40 seconds to do one like this, make sure that you're really going as fast as you can on simple text completions problems to give yourself the extra time you'll need for these long reading comprehension problems. So what we have here, of course, is a weaken question. And anytime we're working a weaken question, we need to identify the conclusion and the premise, consider the gaps in the logic, potential flaws, common flaws maybe that we've seen, and then attack the answer choices. So one word to the wise is that if you read the argument and it sounds good, you've missed something. You're not prepared for the answer choices if the argument sounds totally fine. And that's what happens to a lot of people on this particular argument. We read through it and then we go, okay, kind of blah, blah, blah. There's this E-Slate, there's a company. Okay, they've done some market research. They've got two groups that look like they're going to buy it. And then it's just kind of a math problem. So if we take the two groups, we've got medical professionals, and then we got folks who make over $250K a year, and that's more than 20 million people. So then we estimate if 25% or a quarter of those people will buy the slate, then more than 5 million units will be sold. If we go to the answer choices right here going, hey, sounds good to me, we're more likely to miss the question than we are if we stop and say, well, that math adds up. Sure, 25% of 20 million is definitely 5 million. Where is this argument going wrong? And maybe we could use an analogy here. Let's say that a university reports that it has 5,000 female students and 4,000 English majors. Therefore, there are 9,000 female students and English majors. This is a little clearer example, I think, of, oh, what about the overlap? What if 2,000 of the female students are English majors? That means we've overestimated our amount here. Instead of 9,000, we'd have only 7,000. So we need to account for any potential overlap in the two groups. The big assumption this argument has made, it is assumed that medical professionals and people making 250 grand a year are distinct and separate groups. That's a huge problem, when in fact it's highly likely that many of the people making 250,000 or more are medical professionals. And if that's true, which it probably is, then our estimate isn't necessarily wrong. We wouldn't know until we got the actual numbers, but our estimate is definitely now suspect. It's probably incorrect. It's probably off by a significant amount since we overlooked the potential for overlap. Now we're prepared for the choices. We're basically looking for an answer choice that brings attention to this overlap. With answer choice A, surveys, some of them said they wouldn't buy it. This doesn't matter. We've already done the market research. We already have two groups who are likely to buy it. And whether or not they actually say they will, whether or not they actually do, none of this is on the table for discussion. The only thing that's on the table for discussion here is a quarter of these two groups is 5 million. That's the only thing that's on the table. Whether they're actually going to buy it or not is built into our conclusion, because the conclusion actually says if 1/4 of the people in these markets buy it, that'll be 5 million people. So A is kind of a distracting answer choice because it tries to weaken the idea that they will buy it. But that doesn't matter. Whether or not they buy it, the question is our math right? Is our conclusion correct? With answer choice B, it doesn't matter how many uses this thing has for education versus medical. That's wildly out of scope. C, again, tries to damage the projections or harm the premises. It tries to harm the research done by the company. But so what if we've been too optimistic in the past? Is 25% of these two groups 5 million or not? That's the question here. Answer choice D brings attention to the overlap we were just mentioning. Notice how it does it in kind of a soft, subtle way. Many medical professionals make over $250K a year. So what this says is, hey, there is some overlap between the groups. How much, we don't know. We could still be close to right, but there is at least some overlap, and therefore our math is going to be off in some form or fashion. With answer choice E, they're more likely to buy electronic devices if they make $250K a year. Again, it's totally irrelevant to our conclusion that a quarter of this target market is 5 million. But if anything, this answer choice actually would strengthen our argument. Hey, these guys actually are going to buy it. So in some weird, odd sense, kind of indirectly, it sort of attempts to strengthen. Either way, eliminate it. Answer choice D is the clear winner. All right, up next, we're going to look at a reading comp passage. It's in your handout booklet, section 8.2. It's called the Physical Science Short Passage. Go ahead and pause the recording if you need to dig up that handout and get it ready. And once it's ready, start the recording. I'll give you 2 minutes to diagram and read this passage. All right, a heady read there and kind of an intimidating subject matter for many GRE takers, a science passage. Hopefully, you were able to focus on the structure and not get too caught up in the tiny little details in the passage the first time you read it. And hopefully, anytime you encountered a word that you found really difficult to pronounce, you didn't allow it to disrupt your rhythm too much. You just substituted the word cheese, for example, or something for it. Oh, that C word. Just as long as you recognize what's happening with it throughout the passage, you can still understand what you need to and answer the questions. It's very difficult to keep up momentum if every time we read the word, it's like hitting an enormous speed bump in our car driving through a neighborhood. And we have to slow down, stop, kind of figure out where we are in the passage again, and then keep moving. So remember just to try to keep the momentum up, try to keep moving forward, regardless of the difficulty of the words you're being presented with. Okay, let's attempt a question here. I'll give you a minute for this one. Okay, first things first here, we want to be very clear about our question task. Here, what is always true of an exothermic reaction? So this is going to test our knowledge, our ability to distinguish between the different kinds of reactions discussed in the passage. You may recall that exothermic reactions were first introduced in the very first part of the first paragraph. So this is where you should go to hunt for answers. What do you know about exothermic reactions? Well, in line 2, this very important pivot. However, in contrast to typical exothermic, and then in parentheses, energy releasing. So anytime words are put in parentheses like this following a word like exothermic, this is a definition of the word exothermic. Exothermic means out, energy releasing. Therefore, number 1 is definitely always true. This is the meaning of exothermic reaction. Now, in contrast to typical exothermic reactions, these chemiluminescent reactions yield light but little heat. The physical products of any exothermic reaction have lower inherent chemical energy than the initial ingredients. So this is Roman numeral 3, that sentence that I just read. So now we know that Roman numeral 3 is also correct. Now what about this idea that it yields significantly more heat than light? We have in combustive reactions, the difference in energy is discharged primarily through heat. So in a combustive reaction, there's significantly more heat than light. But in a chemiluminescent reaction, there's more light than heat. And they are both forms of exothermic reactions. So what's really interesting or challenging about this particular problem is that number 2, more heat than light, only applies to typical exothermic reactions. Therefore, it is not always true of exothermic reactions generally. There are some exothermic reactions, namely chemiluminescent reactions, in which this is not the case. Tough problem. Another good example, though, I think of a problem that actually helps us to better understand the passage. So one thing that we'll notice is, as part of our strategy of only focusing or primarily focusing on the structure, the big picture of the passage, and digging into the details when we have to, is that questions will point to the details that are important. We'll have an opportunity to go back to those details, read them, and understand the passage even better in response to the questions, rather than trying to absorb everything the first time we read the passage. So our understanding can progress, can be enhanced as we answer the questions related to one particular passage. 1 minute for this one. Okay, remember that vocab and context questions like this typically involve words that mean what they always mean. We saw versions in class in the passage regarding the Keene of Archie O'Leary. Here we have the word typical, and what does typical mean? Well, let's go back and look at line 3, and we have this great pivot. In contrast to typical exothermic reactions, chemiluminescent reactions yield light but little heat. Notice the skill in reading that sentence and just getting to the core of what's actually important, ignoring all the unnecessary qualifiers and modifiers, and just seeing the sentence in its most basic form. In contrast to typical exothermic reactions, chemiluminescent reactions yield light but little heat. So what does typical mean? The same thing that it always means. And the author here is using it to indicate that in contrast to the typical, chemiluminescent reactions are unusual. 1 minute, beginning now. All right, so getting really clear with our question task here, what's the difference between a sensitizer and a dark quencher? You might have remembered that this occurred in the second paragraph of the passage, so let's turn there for a moment and we'll discover that a sensitizer is occasionally required, okay? Instead of emitting light directly, the excited electron transfers its energy to the sensitizer. So notice again how you can use all these skills you've been developing on the text completion problems here. Instead of emitting light directly, the excited electron transfers its energy to the sensitizer. So not directly, but to the sensitizer, which later releases a photon. So this suggests that the sensitizer is some kind of middleman, that the same basic process happens, just this time it goes to the sensitizer first. So we might say in our minds something like, okay, sensitizer's like a middleman. And then continuing on, conversely, okay, so a dark quencher is nothing like a sensitizer. It does something very different. What does it do? A dark quencher can inhibit chemiluminescence by absorbing energy from the original. Wow. So rather than worrying so much about random thermal collisions and electrons and all this stuff, try to simplify just the role that each of these wild things is posing here or playing. Sensitizer is a middleman of some kind, and a dark quencher inhibits chemiluminescence. So let's take a look at the choices. Answer choice A, in regards to their higher or lower the amount of inherent chemical energy, is wildly out of scope. It never discusses this at all in the passage. In regards to sensitizers and dark quenchers, answer choice B, the sensitizer releases it thermally while the dark quencher releases energy as photons. Actually, the dark quencher inhibits the whole release of photons. So this would sort of be the opposite or the reverse of what happens. Also, sensitizers don't release their energy thermally. They release it as light, as a photon. With answer choice C, sensitizer absorbs energy from the original while the dark quencher transfers energy to that electron. This doesn't say middleman and inhibits. This is not it. With answer choice D, act as an intermediate in a chemiluminescent reaction. Now that sounds like it. Rather than directly, it goes through the sensitizer. This is an intermediate, a middleman. So far, so good. What about the second half? The dark quencher acts as an impediment. Now what do we know? It inhibits. Inhibit, impediment, close enough. We've got our answer. Just a quick look at answer choice E. The sensitizer emits a photon directly, while the dark quencher causes another molecule to emit the photon. This is incorrect, unsupported by the text. D is the best answer. One minute for this one. Last one regarding this passage. Tough question here, guys. It's a tough inference question on a tough passage, which means it's probably one of the hardest reading comprehension questions you could even attempt on the GRE. Let's try to do our best here of making sense of it. First, let's get clear on our question task. We're going to make an inference about removing a dark quencher. So what does the presence of a dark quencher do? Well, as we just read on the last problem, in the last paragraph, when a dark quencher is present, a chemiluminescent reaction is inhibited. So removing a dark quencher, we could logically infer, would enhance or aid the chemiluminescent reaction. So what is a chemiluminescent reaction? Remember in the passage there's been this whole discussion of light versus heat, and that what's special about chemiluminescent reactions is that they produce more light than heat, like a firefly, in contrast to combustion engines, like your car, which produces much more heat than light. So if we're going to aid or enhance a chemiluminescent reaction by removing a dark quencher, we're going to be creating more light and less heat. So we need an answer choice that most clearly says more light, less heat. Now it seems straightforward. However, we're only halfway there. We still have to look at the choices. And looking at answer choice A, your brain might begin to hurt a little bit. You might begin to long for your own form of non-radiative relaxation of high-energy electron states, maybe at a spa in Maui or something. However, the word non-radiative didn't appear in the passage to my knowledge. I can't remember it. I'd have to understand this word in order to really make a good evaluation of answer choice A. I do know that relaxation of high-energy electrons was in the passage. Late in paragraph 1, it tells us that when one of these high-energy electrons relaxes, light is released. So that would seem to be chemiluminescent. Relaxation of high-energy electron states would seem to be releasing light the way we want it to. But this word non-radiative is kind of troubling. So for the moment, I would recommend that we just leave answer choice A on the table and come back to it later. With answer choice B, decrease the relative proportion of energy released thermally. Now that I understand, and it's exactly what I want. I said I want more light, less heat, because I want to help this chemiluminescent reaction by removing the dark quencher. So B sounds pretty good. We'll have to leave it as well. With answer choice C, intensify the flow of heat would be exactly the opposite of what we want to do to the reaction. Answer choice D is wildly out of scope. Energy efficiency was never mentioned anywhere at all, so that's an easy one to eliminate. And with answer choice E, increase the frequency and energy of random collisions. Now, what do we know about random collisions? Let's take a look again at the last paragraph. And we know that dark quenchers actually increase the number of random collisions. So the presence of a dark quencher would do this, not the removal of a dark quencher. And this would at least allow us to eliminate 3 answer choices and take our best guess of the 2 remaining. Of the 2 remaining, B is the one that I personally understand the best at this moment, and I'm going to choose it if I'm sort of role-playing a test taker. B does turn out to be correct here because this is exactly what we wanted to do. Help a chemiluminescent reaction, more light, less heat. This doesn't give us more light, but it does give us less heat, which is half of, what we wanted, an important part of what we wanted. It turns out in answer choice A, the word non-radiative is very important. So while removing a dark quencher, it might foster relaxation of high-energy electron states by helping the chemiluminescent reaction occur. Non-radiative would exclude heat and light, and that is actually not what we want. It turns out that the presence of a dark quencher actually does this. Its removal would do the opposite. Its removal would foster radiative relaxation of high-energy electron states. Now, just like on the real GRE, we can't let the fact that we struggled with a previous question affect the way that we approach the new question that pops up on the screen. So one thing you always want to keep in mind is try to have the perspective of this is a one-question test, one question at a time. Your job on each question is to make the best decision you can. And sometimes that means bailing because it's way too hard. Sometimes that means digging in a little deeper because you know it's one you need to get right. Either way, you know that your goal is not to get every single question right. That's silly. You don't even need to get every single question right to get a perfect score. So you know you're going to miss some questions. It's okay to miss a tough question like the last one we just looked at. You've got to dust yourself off, get back on the horse, so to speak, and face the new question that pops up next with fresh eyes. So let's try to do that here. I'll give you a minute and a half for this one. Now, if you've done any practice at all with these reading comprehension arguments problems, you probably noticed that this is a common form. To begin an argument with the phrase many people or some people, some experts, some critics, or even traditionally or historically, indicates that what's to follow is probably going to be a pivot and a disagreement, a yet, but, however, I think they are wrong. And that's exactly the common form that we see here. Many people are convinced that declining test scores are the fault of the teachers, yet the school has seen an influx of students who don't speak English. And in nearby districts that have seen a similar influx, they have experienced drops in test scores as well. It is a testament to the skill of our teachers that the scores in our district have dropped so little. So what is this guy saying? He's saying it is not the teacher's fault. And we could have predicted this just based on the first two words of the argument. Pretty cool, huh? So when we go to the answer choices then, answer choice E is out immediately. This is not a judgment that the argument corroborates. This is a judgment that the argument disagrees with. Number 2 expresses this. It's an explanation that the argument seeks to refute. It's not the teacher's. And it presents a claim that is at odds with the speaker's interpretation. Both of these are correct here. And we'll wrap up today with a couple of text completion problems. This one is a great opportunity to recycle. What's the overall message here? Difficult and confusing. That's what this professor's assignments are. So in the first blank here, they were difficult not only because she assigned difficult reading assignments, notice just a straight up recycling of that word, but also because her lectures led students down confusing paths of reasoning. How do you like that recycling there? So we're looking for words that mean difficult, confusing. This would lead us directly to Byzantine and sinuous. Rococo would be pretty funny. I've never been given a ream of Rococo reading assignments, but if you Google image search Rococo, you can only imagine what that reading assignment would be like. All right, last one of the day. I realize a minute can go by very quickly on a 3-blank question. If you want to take 10 more seconds or so, just pause the recording and then start it again. Remember when you're working a 2 or 3-blank question to try and start with the easiest blank first when that's possible. Here, the first sentence really gives us no clue whatsoever. Concerns about productivity are blank in the business world. We have no idea what kind of word should go in the blank. We have to keep going. As such, there has been much interest in the claim. Sorry for the typo there. And interesting here that if there has been much interest, well, this now gives me actually a clue as to the first blank. Because if there's much interest in this whole idea, then concerns about productivity must be common or plentiful. So I would choose a word something like common here to go in the blank, based on the clue in the following sentence that says there's been much interest in it. So there's been much interest in the claim that multitaskers' feelings of productivity are something. So here my target is to describe the multitasker's feelings of productivity. I have no idea what a multitasker's feeling of productivity is. I know that multitasker here would mean someone that's doing multiple tasks at once. I would bet that they feel they are very productive, and thus that's why they are multitaskers, but I'm not really sure, so I'd have to keep reading here. This claim is based, now what claim? Oh, the claim that their feelings of productivity are something, okay? This claim is based on research showing that task switching, which I guess pertains to multitaskers, results in a loss of time and attention. Oh, it's a loss of time and attention, causing the multitasker to experience a drop in IQ more than twice that experienced by marijuana smokers. So it's kind of a bad thing, I guess. It turns out that multitasking or task switching, if it's going to drop my IQ and lose time and attention, that's a bad thing. Okay, so I know that it's bad. So what are multitaskers' feelings about productivity then? Because multitaskers, I would surmise, are choosing to do this. They are multitaskers. You're a multitasker. Why? I assume it's because you think you'll get more done. However, this claim here, or this research rather, is showing that you might not actually get more done if you're a multitasker because your time, your attention, and your IQ all drop. So at this moment, I would try my best to come up with a good fill-in for that middle blank. And if it just wasn't possible, just this one time, I'll admit to you that on these questions, since there's only 3 choices per blank, if I have a pretty good idea of the meaning of the sentence and I just can't come up with a fill-in, I'll go ahead and go to the choices. I'm only telling you this in session 8 and on a difficult problem because it's very important that you develop the habit of not letting yourself proceed until you can come up with a fill-in for these past 8 weeks. Now that you're about to finish the course and you're about to go and take the test, you've probably realized that every once in a while there's a situation where those habits just have to be broken and where you don't necessarily pay a penalty. Now, if you find that you begin missing problems when you don't come up with a fill-in, then you know you have to. However, you might find that every once in a while you get away with just really wrestling with the meaning of the sentence for a moment or two and then heading to the choices. I would never recommend this on a 1-blank question though, because there's simply too many choices. So here, if I go to the choices looking for a description of productivity, galvanizing and paramount don't even make sense. So it's like the GRE cut me a break. There's no way for my feelings about productivity to be galvanizing. There's no clue that indicates that it's bringing people together, or paramount, that it's very important. Their feelings of productivity are important. Why? Because their time and attention and IQ are all dropping? This is not suggested by that clue. What this clue suggests is that their feelings must be misleading. They must think that they're being productive, and in fact, They are not, because this study indicates that their attention and IQ have dropped. Now, if we go to the last blank here, adverbs, pretty tough to predict here. How is it going to cause the multitasker to experience a drop in IQ? Sequentially and iniquitously don't make much sense here, but cumulatively does. That over time, you have a loss in attention that results in this staggering drop of IQ. So here we kind of get away with looking at the meaning of the sentence, and then it turns out there's really only a couple of words that even fit. Obviously, the best match for our fill-in common is perennial here. Concerns are perennial, the feelings are misleading, cumulatively leading to a drop in IQ. Thanks so much for participating in the quiz today. I wish you guys the best of luck in this final week before the end of the course. You probably already know this, but I'll tell you it's a good time to take stock of how much practice you've done, how much material you have left to work with, where you fell behind, what gaps in your foundation you need to fill in, and how much time you have to do so before your selected exam date. These are great concerns to bring into the Session 9 recordings or the Session 9 class if you're enrolled in a class right now, because Session 9 is our opportunity to discuss what to do between the end of the course and your exam. Okay, thanks, and have a great week.